Now, this woman needs no introduction, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. She's an award-winning journalist and author of 3 international bestsellers, No Logo, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, and most recently, the book from which this gathering takes its name, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. It's been translated into over 15 languages, taking a radical analysis of the climate crisis and making it mainstream. She's also a Puffin Foundation Writing Fellow at the Nation Institute and sits on the board of directors for the international climate campaign 350.org. She changed the way I saw the world when I was 15, and my grandma actually gave me a copy of The Shock Doctrine and told me that these were the kinds of voices that can help make change happen. And over recent years, she's certainly been vindicated. Naomi's proven to be a clear and courageous voice against injustice all over the world. It's a privilege to have her with us here today. Hopefully she's about to appear on Skype. Everyone, please give a big hand for Naomi Klein. Hello, Naomi, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Thank you so much for being with us today and taking the time. We're going to give you the floor for about 20 minutes or so, and then move on to some questions, if that sounds all right.
That's perfect. Thank you, Maya. I also want to thank your grandma giving you that copy of No Logo, and all of you for being there today. I wish I could be there in person. I'm in the middle of launching a book in different languages in Europe. So I'm in Barcelona right now. I was in Germany last week, and I'm going to France. And it's just been a really, really amazing and crazy few weeks, months. But to be honest with you, the work that you guys are doing is why I wrote the book. Not so that I could go around giving lectures, but because I hope that the book might be a catalyst to start conversations that need to take place, and that those conversations could begin to give life to a transformative political vision. And I don't think it is the role of individual authors to provide people with that vision. I think if that vision is going to be fought for, is going to be sturdy, is going to be powerful, it has to be one that is built from below. I know that books don't change the world, that social movements change the world, and all writers can do is provide some tools along the way that can sometimes be helpful. So the conversation that you're having and the fact that this has been a self-organized event, not something that me or any of the people that I work with had the idea for, but something that came from readers, activists, people who wanted this to happen and then invited me to participate. It's just basically the best thing that's happened to me, in my writing life. So I'm absolutely thrilled to see this happening. I was told not to assume that everybody at this gathering has read the book, or even knows the basics of the thesis. But I don't want to spend too much of my time here with you, laying out the thesis of the book, because I do think that you get the gist of it, which is no matter what we do, our world changes dramatically. We're facing radical change of some kind, one way or another. We are on the road towards radical, devastating, dangerous changes to our physical world. And we don't have to do anything to bring that on. We just have to keep being us. We have to keep barreling down the road we're on, which leads straight to catastrophic levels of warming. It isn't too late to get off that road, to grab the wheel of history and swerve. It is possible to lower our emissions in line with what climate scientists are telling us is compatible with much lower levels of warming. But to do that, we basically have to change everything about our corrupt political system and our profit-driven economic system. So obviously our leaders aren't going to be the ones to grab the wheel and swerve because they are utterly embedded in that logic, products of it. And so it's going to have to be social movements that lead from below, that play that powerful leadership role. We have many precedents from history where social movements have declared crisis from below, provided that moral and political leadership. The problem we have is that we're in a race against time. We have to do it very quickly. We are not going to build the mass movement of the kind we need from scratch in the time we have left. So our only hope is really in a process of weaving together the movements that we already have, because luckily we have many sectors of our society that are already engaged in urgent issues of social, economic, and climate justice. The problem is we don't talk to each other enough. We're in our individual silos, and many really obvious connections fail to be made. And I've been struck again and again as I've been touring with this book at how, despite what we seem to understand intellectually, practically, climate change just constantly gets forgotten. When we're talking about austerity, when we're talking about privatization, there was when I launched the book in the Netherlands, for instance, there was a rail strike that made it difficult to get from Amsterdam to Brussels. And there was a lot of discussion of this among climate activists, mainly as an inconvenience. But the fact that workers were striking to protect their national rail system privatization and protect their jobs was not discussed as a climate issue. And of course, it is a climate issue, because if we're talking about transforming our infrastructure in order to lower emissions dramatically, we need to tap and enhance our public transit systems. In the UK, you know very well that privatized rail systems are not compatible either with the service levels that people need so they don't take short-haul flights, or with emission reduction goals, because your trains should be powered by renewable energy, and they are not for the most part. So that's just one example, but I've really been struck by this in Southern Europe, which has been hit so hard by austerity. I have heard again and again, not just from people on the right, but people on the left, that climate change is not an issue that people can care about when they're worried about putting food on the table, when they're worried about jobs. And there is still this idea that climate change is something we can care about when economic times are good, but when economic times are bad, it has to be sacrificed. So I think that in the UK, you're in a better position because I think that there's a lot more work that has been done over the years in making the connections between the need for jobs, the job crisis, and the climate imperative. You have the 1 million climate jobs campaign instance, and you also have a powerful movement fighting energy poverty that is connected with climate change already. There are, in most parts of the world, people aren't making those connections yet. So you're already starting from a more advanced position that I think has a potential for what you do in the next few days and what comes out of this process to provide a leadership position for the rest of Europe and also the rest of the world as we struggle ahead of the big Paris summit to build the kind of movement that can provide that leadership and vision from below and bring together the growing energy of the climate movement, the climate justice movement that is manifesting itself in so many exciting ways, like the bans on fracking that have been won in Scotland and Wales, New York State, the rapid spread of the fossil fuel divestment movement, including racking up significant victories in recent months. the events like the huge climate march in New York City in September, the fact that this really is becoming not just a mass movement, but a movement grounded in justice, and also the fact that anti-austerity forces are gaining ground across Europe. There is a new wave of anti-austerity, not just activism, but political engagement, right? I mean, I'm in Spain where Podemos, you know, they may not win the next election, but there's certainly going to be an incredibly powerful showing for a political party that didn't exist 15 months ago. And this is just incredible, right? And of course, you have the rise of Syriza in Greece under tremendous pressure. And obviously, there's really a determination to make an example of Syriza and Greece to send a message to the rest of Southern Europe. Don't get any crazy ideas about how you have the power to reject austerity, because, you know, look what happens when you try. And, you know, it was really striking to me when I was in Germany launching the book, that there is this incredible hypocrisy and double standard between what Germany is doing in its own country and what the German government is prescribing with the help of the Troika on the rest of Europe. Because in fact, domestically, Germany is showing perhaps better than any country in the world how you can marry an economic justice agenda with the imperative of climate change. I mean, it's not perfect, but Germany has been in the midst of a dramatic energy transition. It's a transition that was demanded from below by Germany's powerful green movement, particularly its anti-nuclear movement. And now Germany is getting 30% of its electricity from renewables, much of it centralized wind and solar. This has been held by a powerful energy democracy movement where hundreds of cities and towns have voted to take back their electricity grids from the private company that had taken it over because they were tired of seeing the profits generated from energy going into the pockets of private multinationals. They wanted lower rates, they wanted more democracy, more power, and they wanted the resources to stay in communities so that they could use them to pay for services. So you have this kind of, you know, quadruple win of more democracy, clean energy, the ability to fight austerity, and also incredible levels of job creation. 400,000 jobs have been created in Germany in this energy transition. But in Spain, before 2008, Spain was rolling out renewable energy at a fantastic rate. But under cover of austerity, Spain has slashed its support for renewable energy. It killed its feed-in tariff grid. And now people are actively penalized for putting solar panels on their rooftops. And Spain is in the middle of a major push to frack for gas and drill for more oil. And this is happening in Portugal, it's happening in Greece, it's happening in Italy, the same thing. Attacking supports for renewable energy and doubling down on fossil fuel, all under the guise of budget austerity, economic responsibility, and so on. So it's clear that the austerity agenda doesn't just attack people's social well-being, it's destabilizing the planet itself. And what Germany is showing is that taking climate change seriously is a much better economic plan. So this idea that has taken root, even on the left, in some Southern European countries, of, well, we'll care about climate change once the crisis, is exactly wrong. In fact, if we take climate change seriously, we have a route out of the crisis. We have a jobs plan. We have an energy democracy plan, a way to lower rates, keep resources in the community. But these types of agendas need to be articulated through a process like one that you've initiated in London, where all of the relevant parties come together, articulate the principles of a justice-based transition, set clear targets in line with science, and then think about the policies that are going to get us there, right? I think it's really important that when we talk about the potential for green jobs, we are not just talking about putting up solar panels. I think we need to massively expand our definition of what a green job is. Nurses that's a green job. That's already a low carbon sector. We need to recognize the low carbon, underappreciated work that's already happening, much of it by women, much of it by immigrants, in the caregiving profession, the teaching profession, in sanitation. These are the most undervalued jobs in the economy. Some of it completely unpaid. So we need models that recognize this as the parts of our economy that can grow and expand and must grow and expand, even as we contract the parts of our economy that are actively destabilizing life on Earth and making life more precarious in so many ways. So that's the agenda. This is, I think, the excitement of the moment we're in as we think ahead to the conference in Paris. I think it's really critical that we not have a replay of the Copenhagen narrative, where we put way too much hope on this idea that our leaders were going to suddenly see the light and get a deal that was adequate and in line with what climate scientists are telling us we need. We know already from the targets that the EU has put on the table, what the US has on the table, what China has on the table, that the kind of deal that is possible in Paris will be a deal taking us 4 degrees warming, not 2 degrees, let alone 1.5. So I think that doesn't mean we ignore Paris, but the way I think we should think about Paris is as a great big megaphone for the movement to amplify a vision, a justice-based vision for a transformation away from fossil fuels towards 100% renewable energy, one that creates billions of well-paid, unionized jobs, one that dignifies undervalued work in our economy, one that provides a social basis, like which I think a basic income can provide, that makes sure that people aren't forced into dirty jobs and jobs that just fuel mindless consumption, and also frees up time for caregiving and other practices that enhance life. And tangibly improve basic services like public transit. I think we need bold demands like 100% free public transit. These sorts of demands that really get people excited, that are very, very bold. We might not get to free, but I think it's a good idea to start with that sort of bold demand, like the Chilean students demanded free tuition. They weren't just fighting a tuition increase. They went to their core principle, which is that they believe that tuition should be free, and that energized their whole society. So I think we should be thinking about demands like that and stuff like that on the table. So I'm just throwing out a few ideas here. But I think that's the huge potential of Paris, that we have this moment where the climate movement is much more rooted, much more radical, getting bigger all the time. The anti-austerity movement is not just getting bigger, but starting to storm the halls of power, articulating its political agenda. The biggest problem we have is that we're not talking to each other nearly enough. You're having 2 conversations that should be 1, 3, 4 conversations that should be 1 organic conversation of the deep shift in values that we need in our society, a new story of civilization that brings us together rather than apart in the face of crisis. I've said this before, but this changes everything. I see it very much as a sequel to my last book, to the Shock Doctrine, because with that book, what I documented in my reporting was the very worst that humans are capable of to face crisis. And it started off being a book about the invasion of Iraq, how that crisis, that shock, was used to advance a brutal form of deregulated capitalism And then it expanded to becoming a book that told this sort of alternative history of how we ended up with neoliberal capitalism riding on the backs of various shocks. As I was finishing the book, final year, I started to notice that increasing shocks that were taking the ground for a more brutal form of capitalism, more privatized, more unequal, more militarized, were natural disasters linked to climate change, like Hurricane Katrina. And I was in New Orleans writing about that disaster. I really felt like I was looking at a glimpse of the future if we don't radically change course. And so I wrote This Changes Everything because I think we need a kind of roadmap to change course, and we need to do it very quickly. So I just want to thank you so much for the initiative, for the openness, for the creativity, and for the boldness of what you guys are doing over the next few days. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Naomi. I know we've got to let you go in the not too distant future, but just a few questions first. We're going to have some stewards coming round with paper and pens. If you're bursting to ask a question, pop your hand up. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get to everyone. I want to start with the three most popular questions. We ran a social media poll recently asking what people would have most liked to ask you. The first question, pretty broad, I'm afraid, but no surprise that it came in number one. What is, in your opinion, the most effective way to create positive change for the climate?
So I think, in this moment in Europe, in particular, the most effective way is to link the responses to climate change that we need very, very clearly to the pressing need for jobs, particularly for young people, to the need to fight corruption in the political process, because of course there's an intimate connection between how corrupted our political systems are and the revolving door between the energy companies and our politicians, and the fact that we keep getting such lousy policies. And also very tangible economic needs, like the need for lower electricity rates, the need for cheaper public transit. The reason why there is this false idea that you can't care about climate change during an economic crisis is because parts of the green movement advanced policies last decade that blithely passed the bill for climate change onto regular working people. This perception that climate action is a luxury does not come from nowhere. It comes from policies that introduced green energy programs, and people's bills went up. It comes from the idea of a carbon tax that would require working people, like somebody who drives a taxi, to pay as much more indeed, because it's so linked to their profession, for increased taxes on carbon as somebody who earns £1 million a year and is a much, much higher luxury consumer of carbon. So there was not a justice-based principle, an equity principle, a polluter pays principle baked into how we responded to climate change in the past. So people started to feel that they were getting stiff with the bill for this crisis that was largely created by wealthy interests, big corporations, and rich people, and they were absolutely right. And when the economic crisis hit, and those same people got stiff with the bill for the bank bailouts, they were in no kind of mood to also be stiff with the bill to bail out the fossil fuel companies. So as we advance policies, we need to be extremely aware that this perception of climate action as bourgeois luxury comes from very real places, and we need to undo that damage by presenting a vision for climate action that directly addresses inequality.
I've got two more questions for you, and the papers are piling up, so we'll try to get through as many as possible. Second question is, the focus around climate change often seems to be on fossil fuels, but livestock agriculture is responsible for more than half of global emissions and has decimated the world's rainforests. How can we tackle this effectively?
So in the book, I talk about agroecological farming methods being the sort of farming equivalent to decentralized renewable energy democracy in the sense of multiple crises, a crisis of land concentration, the fact that there is a pressing need for land distribution, redistribution, and you're drawing on farming traditions that have known for thousands of years how to protect soil fertility, keep carbon in the soil, and be a climate solution, even if that wasn't the way they thought of themselves previously. So there's been a lot of studies, very high-level UN studies, comparing industrial agriculture, large-scale or organic, industrial-scale organic agriculture, and agroecology, which is different from organic agriculture because agroecology looks different everywhere, but we're talking not about monocrops, but polycrops and so on. So I would encourage people to do reading on ecological farming methods. Raj Patel is a great person to read on this subject. He's somebody who I quote in the book. He's an incredible resource. Via Campesina, obviously, is the world's leading small farmer organization, peasant organization, that has a climate layer to the work that it added a climate layer to the work that it was already doing, demanding land redistribution, land justice, and adopted the slogan "Small farmers cool the planet" because it's true. So I think that those are the types of systemic changes that we need. Obviously we are going. Those of us who have the option are going to have to eat less meat. But I do think that we need to be looking at systemic responses more than just talking about the individual decisions that people need to make. As those who are familiar with the book and the arguments I make, I'm not arguing that those individual changes aren't important. It is important that we examine our own personal carbon use and change our behavior. But we also have to be honest that those individual actions are not going to add up to the level of emission reduction that we need. We need to be looking at large-scale policies that make good decisions easier for a whole lot of people.
Thank you. I'll put the last poll question to you. I think we've got way too many already, I'm afraid, so if you haven't written one, save it for one of our other fantastic speakers. You can speak to all of these issues. They're all really good questions. So our last poll question, Naomi, you've taken a radical vision and really made it mainstream with This Changes Everything. With the media so distorted by corporate power, how can we as a wider movement hope to do the same?
I generally think that movements can spend too much time thinking about how to be palatable to the media when it's really not the task, in my view. I think that the task is really to build movements that are so powerful that they become impossible for news organizations to ignore. And then when they are not ignored, they will be distorted, That's just part of having a radical vision, and that's not something that I'm immune to in any way. I mean, my book has been distorted in the media lots of times, and that, if you're going to put forward a radical critique of power, you should expect how to respond accordingly, and to fight dirty. And I think we are very privileged to live in a time when we are able to reach one another directly so much more easily than a generation ago. That you were able to find each other, the 1,000 people in this room and the people who are listening on live stream, without mainstream media support, using social media, using our own networks. So we can find each other, we can get together face-to-face and online and do that work that's necessary towards building a mass movement. And then as that mass movement builds, you can bet that it's going to be covered. And you can also bet that it's going to be smeared and distorted. But we just have to continue doing our work.
Okay, I know we've got about 5 minutes left, but first question from the audience. George Marshall, in his new book, Don't Even Think About It, argues against using enemy names, I think that says, basically employing a rhetoric of kind of us versus them, and instead that we should always emphasize a common cause for the entirety of humanity. How would you respond?
So, look, I have a lot of respect for George Marshall, and I quote him in the book because I think he has really, really useful analysis that helps us understand, in part, why people have tuned out from climate change, because there was this really strong dissonance between the problem that was being diagnosed, which was clearly huge, and the types of solutions that a lot of green groups were advancing. So it was like, the world is ending, change your light bulb. And people were just like, what? That doesn't really make sense. Like, if we're facing a crisis that is existential for humanity, wouldn't we be asked to do like a little bit more than change our light bulb? Like, wouldn't we be asked to actually change our lives and how our societies function? And so I think George's work on that has been really, really important. But I believe that this discourse within the environmental movement that has kind of erased differences in power and interest, right? That we don't all want change to an equal degree, and there are powerful interests in our society that actively don't want change. Erasing that fact, I don't think has been helpful. And I think that the fact that the fossil fuel divestment movement has spread as quickly as it has on university campuses and in faith organizations and city level is because finally we're admitting that this is actually a battle. We are up against another side. We are up against fossil fuel companies that have 5 times more carbon in their proven reserves than can be burned and still give us a good shot at 2 degrees, hitting that 2 degrees target. They fight like hell to protect those trillions of dollars, and they fight really dirty. So I do find that I have to use us and them language. That's not to say that the CEOs of these companies are evil, that they don't care about their grandkids. We're talking about structures of power. These fossil fuel companies have structures where they are legally responsible to their shareholders. They have business models that force them to have as much carbon in their reserves as they have in production. So it would be basically illegal for them to take climate change seriously unless they fundamentally change their business model. So I think erasing the fact that this is a war, one side knows it and the other side wants us all to pan, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. And what I'm arguing also is that there is an ideology that is associated with the right side of the political spectrum that holds that all we are self-interested, greed-gratifying individuals, that there is something wrong fundamentally with collective action, that there is no such thing as society, that the market is always right. These are the fundamental beliefs at the heart of the ideological project that has triumphed over the past 40 years. And we cannot erase that, because those facts are precisely why we have failed to address the climate crisis. Those ideas, that worldview, has been what has stood in the way of the most basic responses that we needed in the face of the climate crisis. We were privatizing our assets when we should have been holding on to them and transforming them. We were creating market-based solutions when we should have been regulating and penalizing producers. We were acting as individual consumers when we should have been acting collectively. There is an ideological project, and our task as a transformative movement is to directly challenge those values, show how they are incompatible with life on Earth, and change the values of the culture. That's what the right did. They set out to change the values of the culture, and we can't be afraid to say we want to do that too. So I do respect George, but I feel absolutely passionately that we cannot shy away from the fact that we need a battle of ideas, a battle of values.
Okay, final question. I know we're running out of time. Sorry to all who we didn't get a chance to ask for. What are your hopes for the future, the kind of movement you want to see, the kind of role you want to see the left and organised labour play in that movement, and how do you keep hope?
Okay, I'm going to make this a fast one because we're packing up and I'm traveling with my 3-year-old and he's running out of patience. But he's been very patient for an almost 3-year-old, and that's not very patient at all. My hope is that we recognize the depth of the challenge that climate change poses to us. That we see this not as just one issue among many issues, but as a challenge to the core civilizational narrative in which we have been embedded now for a few hundred years. An idea was born in your country in the 1600s. And it was a dangerous idea. The idea was that Earth was not a living, life-giving force that humans needed to be humble in front of, but that it was a machine that could be fully understood and fully dominated through the super intellect of man. And that was just an idea for a while, but when the industrial use of coal was born, also in your country, when the Watts steam engine was invented, it allowed that idea, a very dangerous idea, that we could transcend nature and dominate it completely, that where we live didn't matter, that everywhere was the same as everywhere else, that we were in charge of the world. That coal, the industrial use of coal, allowed that idea to seem to turn into a reality. You no longer had to think about when the wind blew to sail your ships. You could sail your ships whenever you wanted. You no longer had to think about where there was rushing water when you wanted to build a factory. You build your factory anywhere, thanks to the magic of coal. And for a long time, it really did seem that human beings had liberated themselves from the natural world and were occupying this godlike status, that we were the boss. And that's why I see climate change as not just an issue like on a list of issues, but really as a profound spiritual crisis. Because it turns out that there is no one-way relationship with nature. There is no power to absolutely dominate the natural world, because all the while that were occupying this position of dominance, we were burning carbon that was accumulating into the atmosphere, not going anywhere. And now comes the response, because all action has a reaction. And the reaction to those accumulated hundreds of years of emission is climate change. And it is telling us that we are not the boss, that we are guests here, and we're here so long as we behave. And so this is a profound message, really, about interconnection, about living in community with one another and in the natural world. So, you know, I think that this message is really giving us a very large clue about the value shift that we need away from the values of a dominance-based worldview towards an interconnection-based worldview, towards a worldview based on relationship, away from extraction and towards regeneration. So I challenge you to dig deep over the next few days when we think about what this values shift means and what we can learn from climate change. Not just how we can use climate change, but what we can learn from it, how it can change us. Because I think that there are some very positive ways that we can change in the face of this crisis. And what gives me hope is just that I see movement everywhere. I see courage, you know, everywhere I go. And I have to say that what you're doing here over the next few days gives me hope than just about anything else. So thank you so much.